Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Rosh Hashana Daf Ches discusses the Rosh Hashanas of Meiser Behema, of Shanim, of Shemitah, and of Yovel. The Gemara will give the source for each of these Rosh Hashanas, explain what it's Rosh Hashanah for, what halach is it relevant. Where there's a machlokes, the Gemara will explain the different sources and what they argue about, and there will be a machlokes in two of them, the first and the last, and then I will explain how psukim are involved in each one. So the first one that we're discussing is Rosh Hashana of Ma'aseh Behema. That means the day at which the cycle of Ma'aseh Behema starts. All animals born within 1 year go into account, and we take 10% and give it as Ma'aser. But you have to know which animals are born in which year. You have to know where to start in the year. So we've seen there's a machlokes between Rabbi Meir against Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Meir says that Rosh Hashana is Rosh Chodesh El, the first of the month of El, and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon says the first of the month of Tishrei. So where do they get their opinions from? The Gemara gives two possible explanations as to what the machlokes is over, and it's how to read the psukim. So the first pasuk, the first explanation, is that they both arguing over how to read the same pasuk. The pasuk in Tehillim, which says as follows: Lav shukar matzayin. The sheep put on clothing. The Gemara understands that to mean that the sheep became pregnant. And the next part it says V'amakam yatfu bar, and the valleys put on a cloak of their own. That means that there's a layer of green appearing in the valleys, that the crops are starting to grow. Then it says Yisrael, af yeshiru, and the crops are also singing songs. Crops sing songs. Rashi explains when they've grown to be tall and the stalks are in the fields, they knock into each other and they make a rattling sound. That's a shira to Hashem. So you have three things here: the sheep become pregnant, the valley begins to grow crops, and the stalks are tall. Says the Gemara, this is telling us when is the time that the sheep become pregnant, and based on that we could figure out when they give birth, and based on that we could figure out when the Rosh Hashana of Ma'aser Behema has to be. Rabbi Meir says, when do the sheep become pregnant? When is Lav Shukar Matzon? It's when Amalkam Yatfu Var, the next phrase in the pasuk, when the crops begin to sprout. When is that? That's in the month of Adar. Now we know that the gestation period of a sheep is 5 months, so 5 months later, in the month of Av, they give birth. And the next Rosh Chodesh, which is Rosh Chodesh Elul, will be the end of the year and the beginning of the next year as far as Ma'aser Behema is concerned. Now, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say no. When did the sheep become pregnant? You look at the phrase Yisrael af yeshiru, when the crops begin to sing. When do the crops sing? When the stalks are tall. That happens in the month of Nisan. They become pregnant in the month of Nisan, therefore. They give birth 5 months later in the month of Elul, and Rosh Hashana for Ma'aser Behema is the next Rosh Chodesh, which is the first of the month of Tishrei. So the Gemara says, okay, great. Both phrases are in the pasuk, both have a source, but what is each going to do with the other one's sources? So the Gemara says that they each say, my source is the main one, and the others is telling me that there are some sheep that are giving birth at that time as well. So according to Rabbi Meir, the main one is Amakam Yatfu Bar, when the crops begin to grow, and there are some that delay, and they only become pregnant in Yisrael af Yeshu, when the crops are singing. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say, no, the main pregnancy starts, most of them, in Yisrael af Yeshu, when the crops are going to sing. There are some that are a little early, and they go fast, and they start in the month of Adar. But the main one is what I'm saying. So the Gemara says, well, this can't be the machlokes, because it obviously has to be the way Rabbi Meir says it. Because if you look at the pasuk, it has to be in the right order. It says, Lav Shukar Matzon, the sheep become pregnant when? By Amakim Yatfu Bar. And then there are also some Yisrael af Yeshiru. The main group is when the crops begin to sprout, and then there are some that are still waiting until the crops are actually singing. But you can't say it the other way. You can't say first it says when there are some, and then it says when the main ones. Doesn't read that way. So the verse says you're right. You're right. Everybody agrees that Amalkam Yatfu Bar is when the main sheep become pregnant and they give birth in the month of Av. However, according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, you don't make Rosh Hashana for Ma'aser Behema right away in the next coming Rosh Chodesh. You make it a month later. Why is that? And this is their main machlokes, the Gemara says, and this is their second shot. It's how you read the pasuk that says Aser to Aser. The Torah speaks about two types of Maasers, Aser and to Aser. It links the Ma'aser of plants and the Ma'aser of Behema. Now the question is, what does the Torah mean when it links them? So the Gemara says, that's the machlokes. According to Rabbi Meir, it means to say that just like Ma'aser of crops is right after the crops grow, that's when Rosh Hashana of Ma'aser is. So Ma'aser Behema should be right after the animals give birth, and therefore it's Rosh Chodesh Elul. According to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, no. Just like Ma'aser of crops is Rosh Hashana, first of Tishrei, Ma'aser of crops, the Meiser Behema also has it on the same day, not right after they finish giving birth, which would be the first of Elul, but the same day, which is the first of the month of Tishrei, and that's what they argue about. Okay, next, the Gemara moves on to Rosh Hashana L'Shonim. So we said that the first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashana L'Shonim. It's Rosh Hashana for years. So Gemara says, what does that mean? So Gemara has three possibilities here. The Gemara's first offering is that this is for Shtaris. You want to put the date on a contract. Gemara says date on a contract. We already said that's the first of Nisan. Right? We said that's Rosh Hashana L'Malachim because we use king years when we date our contracts. So the Gemara says, no, there's two types of kings. It depends how you date your contract. Some people use Jewish kings and some people use non-Jewish kings, or sometimes you have a Jewish king, sometimes you have a non-Jewish king. Jewish kings go from Nisan, non-Jewish kings go from Tishrei, and that's what we're referring to. The Gemara says that can't be what the Mishnah is telling me, because Rav Chizda told me that, and Rav Chizda can't tell me something that it says explicitly in the Mishnah. So Gemara wants to say, okay, could be that Rav Chizda was only telling me how you understand the psukim in Nehemiah, as we explained on Daf Gimel when he said it, how this is how he understood the psukim, where Tachshasta was not a Jewish king, and therefore we counted his years, and Rav Chizda explained how you understand those psukim. The Gemara says, or it could be that Rav Chizda holds of a different shot on what Rosh Hashana L'Shonim means. Could be that he holds like Rabbi Zera, and Rosh Hashana L'Shonim means that it is the beginning of the year as far as the creation of the sun and the moon, which run our years. Our year is based on the cycle of the rotation of the sun, and also the months, the list of the months for the moon. And it's telling us when they were created and when, therefore, the cycle begins. And therefore, Rosh Hashana of Tishrei is the beginning of the year, the solar year. So where it says this is actually Machlokes, and he would be holding like the opinion of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who says that the world was created in the beginning of Tishrei as opposed to the beginning of Nisan. Now, the third explanation of what Rosh Hashana L'Shana means is this is a time of judgment for the rest of the year, like it says in Rosh Hashana V'adach Rosh Hashana. The Rosh Hashana from the beginning of the year is a judgment for what's going to happen at the end of the year. Now, how do you know that refers to Tishrei? We understand the beginning of the year has a judgment for the end of the year, but maybe that's Nisan. So whereas no, because it also says that judgment happens in Tishrei. Where do you see that? Pasuk says in Tehillim, Tikka b'chad shofar, blow the shofar on the month by Kesayim Chagenu, when the holiday, when it is covered, referring to the moon being covered. When is the moon covered? That is on Rosh Hashana, because the only holiday that falls out on the first of the month. First of the month is when the moon is covered. There is no moon. Moon is not visible at that time. Now the rest of the pasuk says, Ki chok li Yisraelu mishpad elokei Yaakov. It's a judgment for Yisrael, a court case for the of the God of Yaakov, and therefore you see that the judgment is happening then. Now another drasha on this pasuk, the Gemara brings a brayso, Ki chok li Yisraelu mishpad elokei Yaakov, is to teach that the heavenly court doesn't convene until it's Chayk Yisrael, until Klal Yisrael makes Yom Tov down here below. That is when the heavenly court convenes on Rosh Hashana. Now, another explanation is that Chayk Yisrael means that it's judgment for Yisrael. How do you know that there's a judgment also for the nations of the world? Like it says, Mishpat Lelekei Yaakov. Now, if that's the case, that they're both there, why does it say Chayk Yisrael at all? Why doesn't he just include them all at once? Versus to teach that Yisrael goes into judgment first. Just like a king goes to judgment before his servants. What's the reason for that? The Gemara says either, like it says, Mishpat Avdo, Mishpat Amma. Now, what's the reason? Either because a king shouldn't be standing outside while his servant is inside, or in order that he should take the brunt of the wrath and not leave it for his own servant. Okay, next Gemara wants to know what is Rosh Hashana for Shemitah. So Gemara understands that Shemitah, that's when the Kedusha, the halachos of Shemitah begin. Gemara says, how do you know that is the first of Tishrei? Maybe it's Nisan. So Gemara says again, because the Torah describes Bashana Hashviyas, Shabbos, Shabbos, and Yil Aretz, and it uses the word Shana describing the beginning of Shemitah. And Tishrei also has the word Shana, like it says in Rosh Hashana. Like we explained before, Rosh Hashana has to be referring to Tishrei. Where it says, well, Nisan also says Rosh Hashana, like it says Rishon Lechem L'Chadshei Hashana. There's a difference there. It says Chadshei Hashana, and we know that we've said drashos earlier that those two go together. Here, as far as concerning, and when it's discussing Shemitah, it doesn't say Chadshei Hashana, just as regular Shana. So we're going to link regular Shana to regular Shana, not regular Shana to Chadshei Hashana. Okay, next halacha was Shemitah for Yovel. When does the Yovel year begin? So the Gemara asks, the Yovel year doesn't begin on the first of Tishrei. How can the Mishnah say that the first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashana of Yovel? It's not true. Yovel only begins on Yom Kippur when they blow a special shofar during the Yovel year. And that's when everything happens. That's when the Avadim go free, the slaves go free. That's when the property goes back to its ancestral owner. The Gemara says it's a machlekes. That's the opinion of the Rabbanan, but Rabbi Shmuel ben Yochai ben Breika holds that it actually goes back from the beginning of the year on Rosh Hashana of the first of Tishrei is when these things happen. The Gemara quotes a brisa where he spells his opinion in full, and he says it's actually a process that starts on Rosh Hashana and continues to Yom Kippur. He learns out of the pasuk V'kidashtem l'shnas hachamishim shana. You should make holy the 50th year. What does that mean? So he says that it should be miskadeshes. It should be miskadeshes v'halachas. It should get holier and holier as it goes along. How so? On Rosh Hashanah, the avadim don't go free yet, but they stop working. They no longer serve their masters, and they can put crowns on their head, and they eat and drink, and they're happy. They're getting ready to go free. And when they blow the shofar on Yom Kippur, that's when they go free, and they go home, and the fields go back to their ancestral owners. Now, what do the Rabbanon do with the pasuk V'kidashtem l'shnas hachamishim shana? Seems to be extra pasuk there. What's that teaching? Why do you need to be V'kidashtem? Gemara says that's to tell you that you're only mekadesh the shana there. You're not mekadesh the chodesh. You don't do kiddush chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. You're only mekadesh the year. You say you're mekadesh the year when you see the moon. You don't see your mekadesh the chodesh. The Gemara has a different brisa which has a different explanation of how you learn this pasuk. So Gemara says in this version, this brisa, it says V'kidashtem l'shnas hachamishim is to teach me that you don't have Mosef Michal Kodesh. You don't add some Kedushas Yovel into the year that follows. You start Kedusha a little early, even though the halacha is always whenever Shabbos, Yom Tov, Shemitah, Yovel, whenever these things arrive, we start the halachos of Kedusha a little bit early to add on from the mundane to the holy. Have part of the holiness start a little early. The question is, do you extend it late? So Shabbos and Yom Tov, we do that. We let Shabbos and Yom Tov continue a little bit later than it has to. The halacha of Mosef Shabbos, Tosfos Shabbos. But in Yovel we don't do that. How do you know that? Because it says Shnas hachamishim shana. Only the 50th year has Kedusha, not the 51st year. So you end it right away. You don't run any halachos into the 51st year. Now, the Rabbanan don't need this drasha because they don't have V'kidashtem saying that you're mekadesh it and you add a little in the beginning. So they don't have any reason to think you would add a little at the end. So what do they do with the Shnas hachamishim? The says that's to teach me that the 50th year only belongs to this Yovel cycle. You don't start counting the next set of 50 years until after Yovel. Yovel itself only belongs to it's only the final year of a Yovel cycle, not the first year. That's opposed to the opinion of Rabbi Huda, who says that Yovel itself is part of both cycles. It's a 49-year cycle, not a 50-year cycle. And the 50th year is also year one for the next cycle. So the Rabbanan teaches that is not true. That doesn't happen. Yovel is the 50th year only and not the 51st. So what have we learned on this? Daf is discuss the explanation and the sources for Rosh Hashana of Ma'aser Behema, Rosh Hashana of Shanim, Rosh Hashana of Shemitah, and Rosh Hashana of Yovel. So Rosh Hashana of Ma'aser Behema, we had first attempt, we had the psukim that discussed that the sheep become pregnant when the valley starts to sprout and when the crops begin to sing, when the stalks knock into each other. We said that it only makes sense to say that they become pregnant when the crops begin to sprout, and some go later when it begins to sing, and therefore they become pregnant in the month of Adar, and they give birth in the month of Av, and therefore Rosh Hashana of Ma'aser Behema should really be then. But according to Shimon and Rabbi Elazar, we have a pasuk that says it should be Tishrei. We link it to Tishrei because we link it to the crops Ma'aser. Now we had three versions of what Ma'aser, of what Rosh Hashana for Shanim are, either that it's for the Malchei Yisrael, so it's the Malchei Umas Ha'olam, so we could count shtaros, we could put the date on the shtar based on the secular kings, or it could be that it's the beginning of the solar year, or it could be that that's when we judge, and we've seen from Psukim that as well. Then we had Rosh Hashana for Shemitah, which we saw is linked to Tishrei, and Rosh Hashana for Yovel, which is the focus between the Rabbanan and Rav Yishmael ben Yochanan ben Breika, whether it begins on Rosh Hashana or it begins on Yom Kippur, and this is going to the opinion of Yishmael ben Yochanan ben Breika that it begins on Yom Kippur, where the slaves begin to stop working, and then on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashana, it begins on Rosh Hashana, where the slaves stop working, and only on Yom Kippur do they actually go free. And another version of those two drashas was that Shnas Chamishim, according to Rav Yochanan, according to Yishmael ben Yochanan ben Breika, teaches me that there is no Mosef Michal al HaKodesh at the end of Shemitah. According to the Rabbanan, it teaches me that the 50th year does not count as the first year of the next cycle.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.